Okay. Hi, everybody. Hello, Zoom people. My name is Paul Brambett. I'm the director of the Center for Studies in Religion and Society, and I'm really pleased to welcome you. So this is the fifth and final CSRS spring lecture of our 2022 spring series. Although these last 2 years have been a kind of a logistical nightmare for those of us involved in public events of any kind, we tried to have our speaker here 2 years ago and had to keep postponing as the little pandemic became a big pandemic. I want to thank our audiences and our speaker, as well as our staff for sticking with us. What's nice about our series is that we always have a kind of a combination of one-time attendees, as well as those for whom the talks really represent an integral part of their intellectual lives. So whoever you are and wherever you are on Zoom or in the room, welcome. I want to welcome in particular our friends in the local and the far-flung Sikh communities. Special thanks go to my friend and collaborator, Singh, who's with us today, and the many gracious friends involved in helping to welcome today's speaker so kindly into the local scene. The visit by today's speaker, Dr. Jasjit Singh, has been funded by an endowment created by Sikh donors a few decades ago. Until this year, we've been using the fund to purchase texts for the library. But I thought we should try to mix things up a little bit, which is why I proposed inviting Jasjit here from the UK to share his research with us. He's been with us at the center as well as within the local community since Sunday, and things are going so well, I'm fairly sure they're not going to let him leave. But you didn't come here to hear me, I hope. So let me very briefly introduce Dr. Jasjit Singh and then step aside. Jasjit is an associate professor in the School of Philosophy, Religion, and the History of Science at the University of Leeds. His research focuses on the religious and cultural lives of South Asians in Britain, with a particular focus on religious and cultural transmission, and on the representation of religious minorities in the public arena, and more recently in social media especially. He's been involved at the highest levels, not only in the academic field of the sociology of religion and Sikh studies, but in high impact policy relevant engagements with local and national governments in the UK. He's also unusually playful and perceptive in his reflections on what it means to be studying Sikhs as a Sikh insider, so to speak. In a moment, you'll see one of the success is a real gift in being able to connect with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. Speaking of our need to connect and be in right relations with people, I want to conclude my remarks by acknowledging and respecting the traditional territories of Lakota peoples and the Songhees and Esquimalt and Westanish peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Okay, Jazz, take it away.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, folks. I can't emphasize what a pleasure it is to be here after so long in planning this event. And as you know, following Paul, thank you so much for all the efforts that have been made to get me here. So thanks to Paul, Rachel, Scott, Noriko, Indy, thanks to everyone who's hosted me. After two long years, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm not just going to read from my paper. I've got lots of slides. I always have lots of slides, but thankfully most of them are pictures. So I'll do reading and general presentation. But I'm going to talk about. Hang on. Oh. I switched it off. It was working. It was working a minute ago, literally. Oh, okay. Sorry. Hey, okay. We're back. So I'll be covering a brief history of the Sikh tradition in the digital arena, focusing then on religious authority, on its impact on religious authority, and then talking about the mobile guru in particular. I'm speaking for about 40 minutes, and I welcome questions on any aspect of it. I'm really privileged to have people who's studying different religious traditions in the room, so maybe we can discuss some comparisons and compare and contrast how things are similar and different. So generally speaking, the presence of the Sikh tradition online hasn't really been an area of scholarly discussion in many fields of study. I've written a little bit about how Sikhs negotiate choices in relation to technology. And in this talk, I'm going to examine the Sikh tradition online and its impact on the religious lives of Sikhs. So for those of you in the room who remember Usenet groups, Usenet, yeah, see, we're all showing our age here. So Usenet groups, the Sikh tradition first emerged online in the Usenet groups of the early 90s and the mid 90s in the form of the soc.culture.indian Usenet group, which quickly split off to establish a soc.religion.sikhism group. And in those days, these Usenet groups took the form of posts and discussions following those. So there wasn't much interaction. It was a case of people posting observations and questions, and then people responding to those in somewhat of a linear manner. The first website to be established, focusing specifically on Sikhs, was the Sikhs.org website, which was established in 1994. And then from this, as you can see from the slide, obviously this isn't every single website, but it's the kind of range of websites that were established relating to the Sikh tradition, generally over the late 1990s and through to 2005 and onwards. And what's interesting is you only really see recognized Sikh religious authorities establishing websites in the early 2000s, by which time there have already been lots of websites established. So they kind of, were a bit late to the game in terms of establishing their own presence online. And this has significant impacts in terms of religious authority and in terms of engagement. So the Sikhs.org website was established by Sandeep Singh Brar and Rajwinder Singh from Boston University. And what you found in these early days was that it was generally people involved in technology who were establishing the early presence of the Sikh tradition. So people working either in tech companies or students studying tech-related degrees in universities. So yeah, remember these, goodness me, yeah. So the kind of older, cranky old website. Now, one of the most important websites in regards to the Sikh presence online was the SikhNet website, which emerged in '97. And this was established by a group of Sikh converts, white Sikh converts belonging to the 3HO movement. And the reason this particular website became very, very important was because much of the content they produced was produced in English. So videos, lectures, articles, which really appeal to Sikhs in diaspora, particularly those who maybe weren't too strong in the Punjabi language, who were looking for content with which they could engage. So in terms of numbers, the people actually running the website it's not a large group of Sikhs, but in terms of their online presence, they became significantly important purely because of the resources that they were providing at the time. And in my study of how young British Sikhs engage with the online environment and the questions that they tend to ask, I found that you could kind of generally summarize the topics that were being discussed on the websites and discussion forums into these 10 kinds of topics. So discussions of taboo subjects, obviously, because that's what everyone does when they can, when you find a new platform, asking questions, exploring different practices, accessing repositories of religious materials, examining English translations, obtaining daily guidance from the Guru Granth Sahib, which I'll talk about later on in the talk, finding out about Sikh events, accessing archives and recordings, purchasing resources, and understanding the legal position of Sikh articles of faith in the various countries in which they live. So it was generally about understanding knowledge, accessing resources, and engaging with the tradition in these particular kinds of ways. Now, what's interesting in terms of the timing, and it wasn't something I realized when I was first researching this, was that the presence of the Sikh tradition online emerged, as I said, in the mid 90s, which wasn't too long after the events of 1984, Operation Blue Star in the Punjab. So what happened was the internet quickly became what Barry describes a repository of trauma and memory, in that much of the many of the photographs and images that had been taken during the events of 1984 came online, and this became a key topic of discussion for Sikhs who were just entering the internet and engaging with this, with these digital materials. So this particular website, Burning Punjab, hosted images relating to the events of 1984, June 84, November 84, and it was banned in 2001 due to its anti-Indian content. And we'll talk a bit about state regulation of the Sikh presence online throughout the talk as well. But this is a kind of common thread in terms of what states do when they see particular kinds of content and maybe don't really think that this stuff should be out there. So there's a whole host of similar websites, about 84 online at the moment. The NSYF created a campaign called 10 Days of Terror, which every year at this time of year, Sikhs, you'll find these on social media. Sikhs are sharing, content to generally, and when I've spoken to Sikh activists, it's generally about raising awareness amongst, non-Sikhs about these events, because most people aren't aware of what happened in the mid 80s, and also raising awareness amongst young Sikhs too. So the first phase then, websites, and then obviously technology changes very quickly, and a lot has changed in subsequent years. Blogs arrive in the early 2000s. Website discussion forums, so Yahoo groups and Google groups, if anyone remembers those. Again, kind of taking you through this story in the early 2000s. Wikipedia launches in 2001. Sikh Wiki launches in 2005, which is a dedicated Wikipedia about Sikh issues, and you often find that religious groups will copy existing kinds of social media and create their own versions of these, although what tends to happen is they don't tend to last that long, although Sikh Wiki is still around and has a number of articles specifically about Sikh ideas and Sikh issues. Our favorite Facebook launches in September 2006, and many institutions, many Sikh gurdwaras and organizations now have Facebook accounts. YouTube 2005. See, it's interesting even talking about these because it wasn't really that long ago, but things have become so normalized that you don't appreciate that in the year 2000, there was no Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., etc. So, and all of these various different kinds of social media have impacted the Sikh presence online in different ways. So Twitter launches in 2006, and looking at the numbers, 330 million total users in Q1 2019. 187 million 2020. WhatsApp has approximately 2 billion active users a month. This is a reach which, in the pre-internet era just simply wasn't possible. And this clearly has a significant impact on ideas of transmission of authority and identity. I'm sure many of you are on TikTok, probably not. Really? Wow. Okay, so again, just as you think social media is kind of set and there won't be any more innovations, TikTok arrives in 2017, approximately 1 billion users a month. So the point I'm trying to make is that, we don't know what's around the corner in terms of which tools are going to emerge when and how these tools are going to impact on religious identity. But I'm going to talk about some of these tools and and the impact that they've had. And in addition to discourses of 84, Barrier talks about discussion forums and groups addressing lots of similar topics, including Sikh identity, Sikh teachings, threat to Sikhs worldwide, and the degree to which Sikhs practice Punjabi culture. And what the internet does is it, as well as offering Sikhs the opportunity to educate, challenge stereotypes, and address racial discrimination, it also opens up the possibility of controversies, particularly around the representations of Sikhs. So this case is a case of a game called Hitman 2, which was published by IDOS, in which the key person you played, the key kind of hitman, one of the levels was set in a Sikh Gurdwara that looked like the Golden Temple, like the Darbar Sahib, and the point of the game was to shoot these quote terrorists. Now, obviously, Sikhs weren't happy about that. Young Sikhs then forced a campaign. The game company removed the level, but the point is that as well as opening things up to allowing communities to represent themselves in ways in which they wish, it also opens up the possibilities of other groups and other organizations to represent communities in maybe ways that they don't want them to be represented. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. And building on her early work, Doris Jacobs examines how the internet impacts the very construction of Sikh identity. And she argues that particularly in diaspora, what becomes apparent is that there's a specific highly homogeneous Sikh identity being constructed online. So if you Google Sikh woman under Google Images, the impression you get from most of the images is that most, or at least half of Sikh women wear turbans, which isn't the case on the ground. So again, it's interesting in terms of representations, which kinds of images come up in Google search engines, which kinds of algorithms, produce particular kinds of content. And this is all about the representations of the community, not only to themselves, but also to the outside world as well. Okay, so having talked a little bit about the history and about representations, I'm going to talk now about the impact of the online environment on religious authority. And Heidi Campbell talks about when examining religious authority, you need to understand what kinds of religious authority are being impacted by the digital environment. So it's not just a case of religious authority as a whole. And she categorizes these as hierarchy, structure, ideology, and text. And in terms of hierarchy, as I said, given that many websites were established before the official hierarchies gained a presence online, the internet has facilitated the emergence of a number of online religious authorities, particularly for young Sikhs, particularly for those who are able to present religious discourse in English. So the guy where it says "Don't be captured by thoughts," Gurukha Singh was one of the key personalities from SikhNet who would produce videos in English in the early 2000s, and then since then, by Jasjit Singh, Basics of Sikhi, it's probably the most prominent personality to produce English content about the Sikh tradition. Literally millions of followers on YouTube. Everywhere I go around the world, you can kind of find the presence of the Basics of Sikhi team. So not just having an impact online, but offline too. And you see, other personalities like Sardar Singh from Nanak Naam have emerged too. So this is the way in which many young Sikhs are now engaging with the tradition. And in terms of hierarchy, so these guys wouldn't really situate themselves in established religious hierarchies, but they themselves are seen as key personalities. So when Jasjit Singh passed away from cancer in 2017, there was a significant outpouring of emotion from Sikhs across the diaspora because of the impact that he made on them in terms of his teaching. So he's still kind of venerated as a very important figure. And anytime I've done surveys about which individuals have impacted your religious learning, Jasjit Singh comes out top again and again and again. But he established his YouTube channel off his own back, so it wasn't as if it was something that the authorities had decided to do. He just did it in London, and it just became really, really popular. So as well as challenging religious hierarchies, the internet's also impacted on religious structures, in that mobilizations now often take place bypassing traditional authority structures and traditional institutions. So whereas previously gurdwaras would have been the place where people would mobilize around particular issues. So for instance, if you take the turban campaigns in Britain, there was lots of mobilization in gurdwaras around, how do we actually tackle this issue? So when the turban was banned in the UK, in Wolverhampton and Manchester, in the workplace, for bus conductors and like, lots of the mobilization would take place in gurdwaras. Now you see much of the mobilization taking place online. A local example is the Ask Canadian Sikhs hashtag campaign, which was established in response to a Public Safety Canada report. Much of the mobilization took place online. There were offline events too, but you could kind of see, following what was going on, how people were engaging with this particular campaign, mainly through Twitter. So the point there is that, there you can see how it's impacted on religious structures in terms of hierarchy, and that people aren't necessarily going to establish religious authorities to mobilize and to organize campaigns. Although again, in terms of Twitter in particular, Sikhs have been subject to banning in particular by India, where they're seen to be encouraging secession. So again, this isn't something I'm going to go into too much in this talk, but that is an issue in terms of how the state monitors campaigns and activism online. So hierarchy, structure, ideology. as we know, people are born and bred, and you're generally born and bred into a religious context. You generally would have followed the flavour of religion that your family would have transmitted to you. The online environments basically enable Sikhs to understand much more diversity in the Sikh tradition. So there's much more of a pick and mix going on, or let me see which flavour appeals to me. Let me be, at least, because I'm actually aware of all these different flavors of the tradition now, which I wouldn't have been before. In terms of SikhNet and its impact, so in the early to late 2000s, Kundalini Yoga, which is generally practiced by Sikh Dharma International and promoted on SikhNet, there was an increasing presence of Kundalini Yoga classes, for instance, in Gurdwaras, which wasn't something that you would have seen without the impact of the online environment. So you can see how ideology may actually have make an actual difference in terms of practice. And texts. So this is a picture of the Gurdwara in Duncan, where myself, Paul, and Rachel went on an excellent road trip to the other day. And you might notice there the Guru Granth Sahib in the middle of the screen, literally regarded as the living guru of the Sikhs, literally regarded as carrying the light of the previous guru, so you're treated as a living guru. There were two screens hanging down on each side of the Guru Granth Sahib, which I hope you can see, which is a recent innovation, and those screens are there to project translations of the Guru Granth Sahib in English when the congregation is sat down. So you would normally have a translation in this kind of format, where you'd have the original Gurmukhi at the top, you'd have an English translation, and you'd have a transliteration. And what this means is that people can actually understand what's being read, what's being sung, because the Guru Granth Sahib text is written in medieval Punjabi, so not even a native Punjabi speaker would understand everything. So this kind of appeals to the younger generation and the old generation, and you see this software being used in numerous Gurdwaras around the world. And the most common translation used was developed by Dr. Sant Singh Khalsa, again, a key member of 3HO, and he developed his translation in the mid-90s, working from a previous English translation. So he himself cannot speak Gurmukhi or write Gurmukhi. He was building his translation from a previous translation. But the key point is that his translation became the first translation to appear online in the mid-90s as a PDF and a Word document, which meant that it quickly became the de facto translation. So this really has a significant impact, whereas previously, people wanting to engage with translations would have a choice of books. You'd actually maybe compare and contrast. The fact that one translation becomes a de facto translation means that this kind of then becomes the word of the Guru Granth Sahib. And you see from the release of the Sant Singh Khalsa translation how it then becomes the translation used in most software. So previous to that point, and this is a potted history of the emergence of the digital grunt, as I called it. So floppy disks were around in '94. Then you've got CD, all this stuff that's not around anymore, which is going to change the world. So CD-ROMs, loads of CD-ROMs, all the way through the '90s. 6 to the max emerges in 2000, and then it kind of becomes the translation to be used, although there are moves being made by certain Sikh organizations to maybe try and create a more co-authored translation rather than one that's kind of just passed down as the de facto translation. But being a religion geek as I am, I just do this. I kind of wander the streets and look at translations and see which translations are being used. And I tend to find that the Sant Singh Khalsa translation is still pretty much the de facto. So this is from a Sikh museum. And again, Sant Singh Khalsa translation. Sant Singh Khalsa translation. Pretty much every single app uses the Sant Singh Khalsa translation. So the point I'm trying to make is you can kind of see how this could become slightly dangerous if it's just seen as the translation, the de facto translation, again and again. So even though that lots of different apps are produced with lots of facilities, lots of different innovations, the underlying translation is the same. So That's me. That's the, yeah. Sorry, I'll keep using that photograph because I've still got a black beard in there. I'm going to use it for as long as possible. I launched an online survey last year. It was lockdown. Thought, do some research, can't do field work, I'll do an online survey. So I've produced an online survey to see where things are now, to understand, the pulse of the community regards the online environment. So far, I've got 820 responses. So far, so good. People have just obviously got nothing else to do, but I think in lockdown was probably a good time to, to release it. So now I'm going to talk a bit about some of the findings and some of the questions that are coming out of the online survey around these questions of authority primarily. And I'm using the work of Heidi Campbell, who says that to understand how religious communities approach new media, an analysis must be grounded in the understanding of concepts of how specific communities define and relate to religious community, authority, and textual media. Sacred text is what I'm going to focus on, particular because of the status of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji for Sikhs in particular, and the fact that it's regarded as a living guru, and the fact that the reading of Gurbani, the words in the Guru Granth Sahib, the fact that that's regarded as sacred, what does that do? What does that mean when Sikhs are engaging with the writings, the audio from the Guru Granth Sahib using new technology? So so Campbell says their relationship with sacred text serves as a guide to their future interactions and decision-making regarding new forms of media. I'm going to focus on, anyone else got one of these? Anyone got one of these? Anyone not got one of these? Out of interest. Okay, just for those on Zoom, everyone's got a mobile phone, not surprisingly. Right, so interesting. Few studies so far examining religious apps or religious use of apps. There's been studies on the intersection of religious values and Apple and the iPhone. Studies on the use of apps amongst evangelical Christians, and studies on apps outside apps that are listed as religious apps. So there's been some, but not excessive amounts of study on apps. But I think the Sikh case in particular is interesting. I'm going to explain why, and if there's any questions on any of this, I'll be very happy to take it. I'll be also interested in any comparison with other traditions, whether this is the same, whether similar things are going on regards the status of this sacred text. So just to reiterate, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, regarded as a living guru. So these are photos from Paldi Gurdwara. You can see I love the trip, by the way. Yeah. And you can see how the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is there, is installed in the Gurdwara as the leader, the emperor, the focus of the Gurdwara, of the Sikhs, not just treated like a normal book, treated like a living guru, so kept comfortably and the like, and the text is regarded as the sacred word of the guru. And what would normally happen? So obviously, practically speaking, Sikhs can't read from your average day-to-day Sikh couldn't read from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it takes a certain level of practice to install the Guru Granth Sahib Ji at your house. So most Sikhs would have a smaller copy of the Guru, of certain prayers in a little book there. You can see in the blue book, called a Gutga Psalm. So this is called a Gutga. So it's a little book with a collection of prayers in it. And when Sikhs use this book, they would venerate the book as well, because it contains the writings from the Guru Granth Sahib. It's literally the writings of the gurus. So they would, normally wrap it in what's called a ramal, so show it respect. They wouldn't let it touch the floor. They would probably often have a kind of sacred space at home where they would read from the Gutga. So, a certain level of respect. They would delineate the reading of the Gutga from their normal day-to-day lives. Yeah? Okay. So what happens when the Gutga appears on this thing then? Is the question I'm thinking about at the moment. Has everyone ever thought of their phone as a sacred object? But it's an interesting question, isn't it? When, and these aren't all the Gutga apps you can get. There are literally, at least 50 Gutga apps where you can download Gurbani, the words of the gurus, onto this thing and read from it as you would from a Gutga, but not necessarily undertake all of the other things that you would do if you were going to actually read from this good guy. So the reason I'm using this example is I think it's interesting in terms of the use of, because nobody expected this to happen. Nobody expected, the whole knowledge of the world that's ever existed to be, to exist on something that you can carry around on your phone. So how do religious communities then, how do Sikhs deal with this? And there aren't any, because things are moving so quickly, it's not as if there are edicts from on high saying you must do X, Y, and Z, because, people can't catch up. It's just this stuff changing all the time. So there's been some edicts about mobile phones. The Agar Daukat, which is the kind of central body in Amritsar, which delivers edicts about Sikh practice, has said that Raggi, so people who sing Gurbani, people who sing from the Guru Granth Sahib, shouldn't sing from mobile phones, because rather than using them as a shortcut, they should be memorizing the words that they're singing and sing them, having taken the time to memorize them and understand what they're singing. So they're making a distinction there between the kind of more profane use of the phone, which is seen as a bit of a cheat, versus the sacred use of the understanding of the words of the Guru, and the effort that the Raggi has gone into to actually understand what they're singing. So they've banned anybody singing Kirtan in the Darbar Sahib, in the Golden Temple, from using cell phones while on duty, because they want to encourage them to memorize the words that they're singing. And there's also apparently been complaints about bhattis playing games on their mobile phones while they're supposed to be on religious duty, which again, you wouldn't be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to do that from a good guy, would you? This thing has a purpose and it's only ever used for this purpose. Whereas this thing, you can go anywhere, can't it? So it's really, really interesting how, and this is from the religious authorities. This is one of the few responses that I've seen from the Sikh religious authorities regarding the use of technology. Another one is the use of TikTok in the sanctum area of the Golden Temple of the Darbar Sahib. So apparently there was a case in January 2020 where I think 3 girls were filming a TikTok video in a sanctum, which went viral. And as a consequence, the authorities have now banned, and this is the only app they've banned. I'm not sure if TikTok are aware of this, but it's interesting that TikTok is the only app they've actually banned inside the inner sanctum of the Golden Temple, because and you can see the poster there, TikTok is prohibited here, and that's a picture from inside the Darbar Sahib. So again, you can see the authorities are trying to understand what to do with these things. Nobody's banned Facebook or Twitter, but TikTok, I think, has obviously taken things to the next level. So on the survey, I've asked the question, have Sikh teachings influenced how you use technology? Have you embraced or rejected certain technologies due to your Sikh values? And as you can see, the majority of people from the response have said that they don't think it really has affected their use of technology, whereas some have said that they have considered what to do with this question in particular. Now, this question hasn't just arisen for mobile phones. So when CDs were, first released, and you could, in fact, you could play music in your car, wasn't something before that. You would listen to Kirtan at home. You would take your shoes off. You would, listen again in a particular kind of context. Now you're listening to Kirtan in the car with your shoes on. Is your head covered? There were loads of debates, and there's all that. But what I've noticed in my analysis is that all the debates have generally been around Gurbani, the singing, or how to treat the singing of devotional hymns, and how to treat the reading of the text as well. How to treat that with sufficient sanctity. Responses, I think it's very individual. My family won't take the mobile to the washroom as it's used to do bath. And I read Gurbani, whereas I don't have other such feelings whatsoever. Other people have told me that they have 2 separate phones, for instance, one purely for doing Barton, so that one kind of ends up acting like a good guy in a way, and the other one's their kind of normal phone. Other people have said that they always use a screen wipe before they're gonna, so there's different. What's interesting is that these are individual responses to this particular question of what do I do with this technology. And these individual responses themselves also impact on ideas of authority, because if you're making decisions for yourself without feeling the need to consult an authority to guide you on what to do, that kind of causes a bit of a break between these traditional, or how many time? Yeah, authority structures. I've almost finished. So pros and cons. Technology has made Gurbani more accessible. I do all my part using the Gutka app. Lots of people said that Guru Nanak embraced change, and the Gurus invented, new instruments, and innovation is key to Sikh practice. But this was an interesting point. One thing you'll never know is if the Gurbani is altered by hackers and the like. Now, this is a really, really significant point, because the sanctity of Gurbani is something that's really, really important for Sikhs. You are not allowed to change a single word. But if you're taking an app on trust, how do you know whether the text that you're reading is actually the correct text? Unless you can trust the people who've created the app. So this all again brings up lots of interesting questions around the sanctity of the words and respect of the text as well. So closing thoughts. As a minority community, Sikhs are a minority community wherever they exist in the world, purely numbers wise. But the environment, the digital environment, plays an important role in linking Sikhs in various parts of the diaspora together, particularly when they face issues. So there's an issue in Australia recently with a Gurban, and you could see how Sikhs in Canada and the UK were kind of assisting them deal with the authorities around this particular issue. I've also found that websites, discussion forums, and social media often exist in parallel. So it's not as if the Google groups and the Yahoo groups and the discussion forums have gone away. They're still being used by the generations that have used them from the year 2000. It's just that more and more arenas are being developed. So you often find parallel conversations taking place. You often find very little institutional memory. So all the questions and issues I found being raised in the mid-90s on the Usenet groups are still being raised on Twitter in 2022. I'm like, guys, we've talked about this for 20 years. Anyway, yeah. So there's also an increasingly non-English digital environment, which we must be aware of, because it's easy to think that everything on the internet is in English, or we Google something, we see all the results. Religious transmission online very much depends on the previous background and affiliations of the individual. So if you come to the online environment, kind of raw, then you can kind of find maybe answers to basic questions, but some people often come with a particular affiliation, and the internet allows them to engage with people from that particular group. The impacts of technology aren't always immediately apparent. So when the translation software was first released, everyone was like, wow, this is amazing, it's really helping. And it does. It's really important for people to be able to at least understand some of the words that they're reading. But then the nuance behind that is that what happens if a particular translation becomes the de facto translation? And finally, Sikhs constantly negotiate technological advances. So a friend of mine literally lives down the road from me in Leeds, is producing videos on TikTok about the turban and the hair. He's getting millions of views, So, Sikhs do embrace technology pretty quickly. The Sikh digital space will continue to evolve and impact on authority, identity, and community in new and unexpected ways. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Jazz. That was fantastic, as I knew it would be. So we have about 25 people online, and there's folks in the room too. So we have now about 20 minutes or so for some conversation. I'm just going to take advantage of my role here and pose the first question,
Yep.
Which is that when I think this Sunday or Monday when we were together, we were talking about the table and chairs debate from a while ago, where you began to see factions that got created around this particular question of whether or not in the Gurdwara one should sit on tables and chairs, or whether one should sit traditionally on the floor. And then that particular incident becomes this kind of catalyzing moment where people get pulled in one or the other direction. So I guess I'm almost a bit surprised that this question of whether you can read the text on a cell phone or whether you should just avoid it altogether hasn't led to any kind of that. In other words, are there no people within the community that just say, you know what, this is a textual community. We have paper, we have, the book is fine. We want you to come to the Gurdwara and hear it, read it. I'm a bit surprised that there isn't that. That isn't one of the responses, or perhaps it's such a minority.
Yeah, that's the issue, Paul. Unfortunately, despite being a textual community, not many people read the text. So it's, I think the Sikhs in the room would probably disagree. So agree with that. But it's the tables chairs issue is something that people kind of physically see and get behind. But whereas this I think, again, as I said, it's something that you assume it's a good thing. You assume translations are a good thing, but then going deeper into it and thinking, okay, what are the consequences of one translation becoming de facto? What does that actually do? But the response to that is that people have realized that. People are realizing that. So there's two responses. Firstly, innovations around software. So people are trying to produce more kind of collaborative translations. And secondly, I found young Sikhs who went to Punjabi school as kids, didn't really learn Punjabi, just spent most of the time messing about. Many of them are actually returning to learn Punjabi and Gurmukhi in their late teens and early 20s because they want a more authentic engagement with the text. So they'll attend classes about pronunciation of the words, and there's a lot of investment I can see from young Sikhs to try and avoid the need for translation.
But they're not worried about the medium through which the translation comes to them, right?
No, they're not, because they see it as a personal decision, because there hasn't been an edict from on high, and and that's what I'm looking at the moment, is how are people negotiating that.
Interesting. Rachel, so by the way, people who are online who want to ask a question can ask it through the chat, and then Rachel will articulate your question for you.
Great. So Zabine has a question, unsurprisingly.
Hey Zabine.
Hello. Your presentation depicts a story of a congregational practice of reading/listening Gurbani, and how this seemingly transforms to an individual practice of that, perhaps disrupts the traditional transmission in a family structure. Have you considered how these mobile apps have created new spaces of congregation and discussion for younger generations? So for example, on Clubhouse, there is a live Gurbani recitation 24/7, and folks drop in and create separate rooms to discuss what they heard at that time. Also, let's chat soon, she says.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, thanks, Sabine. And thanks for joining the presentation. Yeah, again, as I said, recent innovations. So May, what year are we in? 2022. Yeah, May last year, when Twitter Spaces emerged and Clubhouse, I mean, they're both quite recent innovations as well. So I've been watching and participating in those innovations as well. And it's interesting to see the difference between. So I think one of the reasons why Twitter is such a cesspit a lot of the time is because you can't understand the emotion and the nuances behind people's positions when you're just reading text. But when I've attended Twitter Spaces, and I haven't attended Clubhouse yet, but it's pretty similar, and you actually hear people's voices. I found a lot, and Discord as well, for example. So I was part of a camp on Discord too recently. I think this audio is very, very different when you can actually hear the intonations in people's voices. You actually hear the person's voice as actually a human being on the other side of it, as opposed to 140 or whatever number of characters. So certainly, I think as I said, innovations happen all the time. But I think there's certainly less antagonism on the audio platforms than there is on the textual platforms. And also the audio platforms then do exactly what Zabine said in terms of enabling people to get together and actually participate in a practice together, even though they're physically dispersed.
Thanks. Paige.
Hi, Jazz. Thanks. That was so great. One of your first slides talked about the things that people are talking about on websites. And the first thing was talking about taboo topics. And then one of your very last point talked about the impact of being digital on things like identity and authority. And I'm wondering what the digital impact has been for Sikhs with other intersecting identities, like female or disabled or LGBTQ.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. So LGBTQ in particular, Sobert.net, there's a website. They have, having spoken to, they have offline events. So it's opened up the opportunity for people who maybe wouldn't have been able to engage with each other before to do that. And the same goes for, so this is going to be interesting regards the pandemic as well. So I've seen female Sikh organizations emerge online over the years, and then maybe kind of generally not last too long, but they're still separate from the established authority structures. What I'm hoping and what I've seen as a consequence of COVID and as a consequence of the normalization of video meetings is, whereas previously you would have maybe a group of men sitting in a room for 4 hours physically, in a particular place, and the women wouldn't attend because they've got all the important jobs to do. I think the normalization of video calls, from what I've seen, means that hopefully there'll be more diversity in some of the meetings and organizations going forward, where people who maybe can't physically travel to meetings or go to certain places are able to attend. So I'm watching that carefully as well, in terms of the impact of the pandemic. But in answer to your question, certainly it has opened up a lot of opportunities for people to engage who maybe couldn't have before. Hard to generalize. So you get both sides, don't you? Yeah, as with anything, it's hardened attitudes and it's also. But I think at least it's made people aware of the existence of groups who wouldn't have had any presence before.
Good. Thanks, Paige. Rachel has a question. There's some very good ones. I'm sort of just seeing the first bits of them on the chat.
There's multiple good questions. So we'll start here. So Sukraj asks, has Sikh behavior online been impacted and conformed according to algorithms and incentives as what we might expect? And how might that look in Sikh space?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's very hard. It has answered the question. Of course it has, because that's what a lot of my respondents said. It was really interesting seeing how many were aware of their engagement. So a number of responses said they didn't want to discuss Sikh issues on social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, because of algorithms, and they would rather continue on discussion on the kind of more archaic, methods, because there weren't algorithms there. So people are a lot more aware than I am of what they're engaging with and the consequences of that. So to answer the question, yes, definitely. But I don't have access to the algorithms. I would love to have that, but I'm not sure how it actually works. But yeah.
But since you brought up the question of algorithms,
Yeah.
I think somebody online asked a question about surveillance from the Indian state.
Yeah.
Or from let's say national entities that don't mean that have some hostile feelings toward Sikh activism.
Yeah.
Would there be a concern among people in these chat rooms on Facebook and Twitter and other places about kind of state surveillance?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and everyone's aware that it happens. And there's a Scottish man who's currently in India, Singh, who's basically been there since 2017. And one of the reasons he's there is because he was participating in a website called Never Forget 84, and he's been there since then. So
he's been there. You mean like
he's arrested?
He's in jail.
He's in jail. Yeah,
it's not a tourist.
Yeah, he's not a tourist. No, he was a tourist, but he's now in jail. And yeah, Sikhs are aware of the dangers of putting, because the issue is it is all public, isn't it? Especially Twitter, so people can follow anything people are doing.
Rachel?
So we have a question from Hannah, and Hannah says, in my role, I'm trying to engage with Sikhs in Wolverhampton to identify their healthcare priorities, knowledge of research, and long-term to co-design research with them.
Yep.
What would you suggest is a good way to begin engagement in the community using technology or otherwise?
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Hannah. So as part of my most recent research project, I produced a report about Sikh activism in Britain. But before publishing it, I went around the community physically and presented my findings to get feedback. So the way this worked was it was anybody could attend, but once you're in the room, it was all Chatham House. And I think the community's really appreciated that I'd actually done that before publication, because I got feedback on the report. And a lot of them said that they'd never had the opportunity to discuss difficult issues in a safe environment physically before. So in answer to your question, Hannah, I wouldn't do it online, especially if you're based in a locality. I would actually get out there to a community venue, run an event, and see people face to face. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks. I'm just going to keep going unless somebody else in the room puts their hand up. So Sukraj asks, has Gurdwara attendance been impacted by Sikh online space?
Good question, Sukhras. Thank you. So I've just finished the chapter on Sikh television channels, and it's often argued that Sikh TV has taken away congregations from gurdwaras because it generally appeals to the older generation. Now, has the online environment impacted on gurdwara attendance? There aren't any measures of gurdwara attendance, but I think measuring gurdwara attendance, what tended to happen, or what's tended to happen, is people have generally measured attendance on a Sunday. Sunday is the kind of main day when people go and people see, okay, how big is the congregation this week? Is it bigger than last week? You know, what's going on? As part of my PhD, I just hung out in a gurdwara for a week, just to see who turned up when. And what I found was that I found young Sikhs in particular were attending gurdwaras before going to work or after work, and not attending on a Sunday. And when I asked them why, it's because they said they didn't want to get involved in all the, you know, just all the nonsense on the Sunday when they would get asked multiple questions about when they were getting married or what clothes they were wearing or whatever. So has it affected on gurdwara attendance? I can't say, you know, I haven't got any firm data to say whether it hasn't, but I think what is interesting is that the gurdwara as a space is being used by young Sikhs in interesting ways. In my PhD, I asked the question as to why people attend gurdwaras, and I gave people a list on my survey. I said, do you attend, you know, to eat langar, to meet your friends, to, I don't know, to go to Punjabi school, blah, blah, blah. I had a whole list. And loads of responses were saying, why have you not said to be with the Guru Granth Sahib? Why have you missed this out? So Sikhs themselves were saying, I go to the Gurdwara to be with the Guru Granth Sahib. That's my main reason for going. And you can do that on any day of the week, at any time of the week. So I can't, as I say, I can't say if it has or not, but what I'm in my roundabout answer is I think the relationship is possibly changed a little bit. Or maybe they're not as concerned as the old generation to show that they've been to the Gurdwara. Yeah.
All right, another question from Nicola Mooney. Nicola asks,
hi, Nicola.
Lovely to get to hear about your recent work, although I apologize for missing the first part, so you may have addressed this in your setup. I wonder if is there a broader reading of modernity that is influencing the sorts of adoptions of technology and apparent lack of interrogation of and centralized authority over those processes? I mean, the idea and identity position that many Sikhs, in my experience, espouse that Sikhs are modern and Sikhi is a modern tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what drives the willingness to take on new technology and innovation, because they see it as part of the kind of Sikh ethos. It's what we've always done. It's what we do. So if you go back, you know, to the printing press, the fact that Sikhs took on the printing press, which was brought to India by Christian missionaries, they took it on themselves and started producing printed copies of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. In the Anandpur Sahib resolution, they included a need or a request to have a Sikh radio station. So Sikhs have always talked about how to use technology in you know, to advance the tradition. Yeah.
All right, Sabine also wants to know if you can share the demographics of your new survey.
No, not yet. I'm still looking at it. Sabine. Sorry, I haven't looked at it properly yet. No. You have to wait. The book's being written slowly.
One of the things that you mentioned about the internet space where it's about audio versus the textual spaces is that the textual spaces tend to be more hostile, and there's less fact checking, I think, because people are just free to say something, you know. And I wonder if because I know you've done some work on different types of radicalization in the past, and one of the problems with, as we said, with vaccine uptake research, one of the problems with a textual space where there's no opportunity to say, actually, wait, slow down, that's actually not true about Bill Gates or 5G chips or anything like that. I wonder if you have any worries about the way in which a textual space, in which Sikhs might talk about politics or might talk about the Indian state or whatever it might be, Khalistan, whatever kind of political topic might arise. Do you see in your research any tendencies to move in kind of or sort of police the radicalization, which it would be normal in any, this is not Sikh specific, by the way, to be clear. But I just, you know, controversial conversations often get fairly hysterical fairly quickly.
Yeah, although it's interesting. So, which is why Sikh Twitter is really a case in its own compared to the other platforms of social media. That you do get quite, you know, engaged conversations on Sikh Twitter from both perspectives. And I think both sides need to, because Twitter's so performative, that's the thing, it's so performative. You're basically saying everything out in public. So if you can't defend your position, then it's crash and burn basically on Twitter. So people need to be, to be able to defend or at least argue what they're saying carefully. If they don't, then that everyone can see that and nobody forgets.
So Catherine Young is asking a bit of a change in the conversation, but related. Is internet religion becoming a common category in religious studies? So asking you to reflect a little bit more on the broader religious studies world. So is that represented at things like the AAR and that sort of thing?
Digital religion as a field is certainly growing, thanks to people like Heidi Campbell and the like. And I think it's a consequence of the fact that this distinction between online and offline is something that I remember, but which doesn't really exist for our students at all, really. So it's not as if it's something separate. It is. So as a field, it's certainly growing, and my book that I'm kind of writing slowly will hopefully be contributing to that field.
Actually, apropos of Catherine's question, the sort of digital native versus digital newcomer, right? So like you and I are old enough to remember where there was a distinction between your friends and your online friends. Right, but for my son who's 19,
absolutely,
that distinction doesn't really mean anything. And my wife, whenever she would meet a new patient, she would ask them about their eating habits, their mental health issues, their friends, and they would say, "Well, I have 25 friends," and they would say, and she would say, "What are those real friends or those internet friends?" And they would like if the person was under 30, they would just look at her like, what are you asking? So when you're doing this research, are you thinking about the kind of generational impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of self-reflection, because even for myself, it's, the speed at which it's become normalized, and that distinction is blurred to a degree, isn't it, really? Even though it might have been a generational difference maybe 10 years ago, I'm not even sure that exists anymore to the same sort of degree.
I think Matthew had a question.
Thank you. And I became aware as a fellow with the CSRS that I will also get to engage more tomorrow. So I'm going to ask one of about 30 questions now.
Great.
That's for your presentation. I'm a rabbi. I'm 36 years old. I do a lot of things online. Sure. And this is a pretty particular question about Wikipedia. In comparison, I have found, as someone also was especially informed by, academics in what I teach and what I believe in. The quality of the average Jewish Wikipedia article, I have noticed, is well below the quality of the average, science article on there, or something about current events, because of, I think, the critical mass of people who are editing and commenting on it. And it's a project that's way too big for any one person to take on, correcting some of these things that are on there. I'm curious what you or others, if you know anyone who's commented on that in the Sikh community about the quality of the scholarship or the how accurate is the information represented on the average article on Wikipedia?
It's a really good question. It's something I'm looking at the moment. I've spoken to people who've written Wikipedia articles about the Sikh tradition, and a lot of it, Wikipedia itself is political. Wikipedia itself will only accept certain kinds of references, which then privileges certain kinds of knowledge. So there's a lot. I haven't dissected it all yet, but there's a lot to it beyond simply people putting up what they think. The processes people need to go through to get Wikipedia material up there now, as compared to when it first started, are much more stringent. I can't say too much about it, but it's something I'm actually looking into as we speak, and I'm speaking to people who've written. It's interesting. People who've written articles themselves, they're not necessarily. They wouldn't describe themselves as experts. It's just that, again, it's all about the tech knowledge. The fact that these people were in the IT industries or knew or did this in there. One guy I spoke to was basically retired, and he said, I had nothing else to do, so I thought I would write Wikipedia articles about this. And he said, I don't view myself as a scholar, but I thought there wasn't a presence online, so I thought I might as well create one. And those articles are still there. So the regulation, is something that's I'm looking into at the moment. Yeah.
we have
But it'd be
time.
good to talk about the Torah and the Guru Granth Sahib and any kind of similarities and distinctions about that as well. Yeah, at some stage. Yeah, sure.
So unfortunately, we're out of time, which is a shame because this is such an interesting topic, and I'm so glad we're going to be able to have a chance tomorrow to tease this out with you.
Yeah.
But thanks for everybody via Zoom who joined us.
Thanks, guys.
And thanks for those of you who joined us today here. So this is the end of our official spring lecture series, but I'm hosting this event on the Yoga Sutras. So if you're interested in Asian religious texts and traditions and the way they are reimagined in the contemporary context, tune in for this. This will be on our website, so you can join us. It's online only because it's part of a broader national conversation we want to have. Thanks, Scott, for making this up. I appreciate it. So thanks very much, Jasjit. That was wonderful.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
So have a good rest of the month, everyone. We'll see you at the end of June, hopefully, for this event.